Hello and welcome into this week's book club episode of Breaking Down Bloodline, the novel by Claudia Gray. If you're joining us for this video, congratulations, it's the last video. So if you are unfamiliar with the series, go ahead and click here and we'll take you back to the beginning. But basically we've been going through this book 2 chapters at a time, breaking down the bigger themes and events, and it's a bittersweet point here. This is, I believe, our 17th video in the series, 18 if you count the announcement video. Which means we've spent a little over 4 months with this book. Longer than that with this book club, if you go back to the Aftermath books that we talked about. And it's been a ride, for sure. Hitting the end of the book is always something that's exciting, and I'm really glad that we were able to get through this. Before we get to the Rise of Skywalker, not because I necessarily think anything important in it is going to be important to the Rise of Skywalker per se, but just any kind of understanding of Leia's character and how the galaxy works as a whole, I think, is good. So we're going to do what we've always done. We're going to go through the chapters, talk about that a little bit, talk about some end of the book themes, and also talk about a few kind of interesting theories I wanted to bring up, but I didn't want to bring up to the end of the book. But let's go ahead and go to chapter 30. So chapter 30 starts off with Joff and Greer, and they're discussing what to do with the detonators. They have these detonators from Red Ribbon's organization. They don't know if they should hand them into the military. There is no real protocol, because what they were doing was kind of off the books anyway. And they ultimately decide to hang on to them because they're starting to get the vibe, as a lot of characters are, that there's probably a storm coming, there's some kind of conflict coming, and having a whole bunch of detonators may be a useful thing. Then we go to Senator Castroveau. He goes to visit Leia. Things are tense. Even 3PO is like, I don't know why she's seeing you, but you can. So if even 3PO is upset to the point of breaching protocol a little bit, that should tell you something. Their conversation is very heartfelt. Leia is very well done in this part of the book. What's gone on between them is very intense. It's something where, they were friends to a point where I feel like if Castroveau had overreacted, to put it mildly, and outed some sort of family issue like this to a different senator, Leia would have been like, you screwed up, this, and like put him in his place, but could have seen past it. Like, she understands why he did what he did. And I think Castroveau has reached a point where he understands why Leia would keep this a secret, and certainly understands that Leia is not this evil being that he was trying to see her as. At one point in this chapter, he even describes how he was having such a hard time looking at her for a while, but now sees the person that he'd always seen. If this was someone else, like, their friendship could have stayed to the point where they can understand why the other person did the thing that hurt the other person, but because they hurt each other, there's a rift there. And it's a tragic rift, but it is something that happens. So instead of Leia truly, like, I believe that Leia forgives him, but rather than opening her arms and saying, hey, we're going to be friends again, I'm going to forget like nothing ever happened, she's like, I'm not going to thank you for helping me because you did the right thing and you don't deserve to be congratulated for doing your job, doing your duty. But I'm going to acknowledge that you did the right thing and you had a lot of good character in choosing to do this in a way that no one else in the Senate is doing. And she actually kind of passes the torch to him in her mind of a young, aspiring person who could bring people together, who, even if she doesn't really agree with his vision of the galaxy, knows that he will listen to reason and knows that he will listen to others, and is somebody she can at least trust to have integrity, even if they don't see eye to eye politically. But she does all of that without ever saying we're back to what we were. And it shows a lot of strength in Leia's character. One, that she doesn't give in to any kind of feelings of guilt to let Castroveau off the hook, but two, a great strength of character to not just see him as garbage or only see the pain he's caused her. It's a really delicate thing to write, and this is a moment to me where Gray's writing of Leia really, really shines through. As much as there were so many little moments throughout the whole book, so many cute little character things that she did, this is the hard stuff to write, and it's done so absolutely eloquently. From here, Leia goes to her first public appearance in a while. She goes to this party. it's in honor of Gar. It's all about political will. So here you're kind of seeing where Leia's role within the New Republic could be. That there's this understanding with party leadership, like, hey, we don't want to exile you, we don't want to ignore you, but we can't touch you right now. So our plan is to slowly push you back out into society, and as people calm down, then we can give you a little bit more power, but right now you can't. This kind of stuff is always so interesting to me, both in a fictional context and because it has to happen in a real world context as well. This idea of, I'm presuming senators are elected to some degree. I mean, if you look at Padme as a senator, she was appointed by the Queen. The Queen was at least democratically elected. It may have said in the book, and I'm not remembering, but I don't know if they were elected or appointed, but either way, they're supposed to represent the people. But then somehow, just through clout, you know, you have some that have more power than others, and there's this internal power structure. And it's just a natural course of how things happen, good or bad, right or wrong. But it's interesting to see this play out, and Leia kind of going to the bottom of the totem pole, but seeing that there's a path. Leia finds herself hoping that she can advise Gar. Again, with Gar, she knows he has integrity personally. He's not a liar. He's not a thief. He doesn't want to do things that in his mind would abuse power. But she's also kind of worried about him because he's somebody who would set up the first senator role to fail. That he would intentionally do nothing in the position to prove that the position is worthless in order to rectify it in some way. Which I suppose, depending on your point of view, you could argue is an abuse of power, but it's not an abuse of power like for himself. It would be an abuse of power for his political ideology, I suppose. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more gray. It's unfortunate. I think Leia really would have been much better for the role. Somebody who has a disdain for the role's existence, but the intent to use it if it's there, but to use it with the respect for what it is. But she's hoping that she could at least advise Gar. Then Corey shows up, and they make up. So, you know, we'd seen her kind of run out on Leia, and she comes back and apologizes. Says, you know, you can't be held responsible for your father. Leia talks about how she was expecting some of the Senate leadership to kind of come back and say that, but she wasn't expecting the first person to be a 16-year-old girl. In the line specifically, the wisest and most experienced were outshone by a 16-year-old girl. To just kind of show her, like, hey, I'm gonna come and apologize for my gut reaction. That you certainly, I certainly can't blame Corey for. It's frustrating from some of the other characters that we saw in the book, but not from Corey. Not from Cor. She is young. She is kind of doing a job that's probably a little bit beyond her, just age-wise. I mean, Leia may be Leia, but, you know, she shouldn't have been doing all of that she was doing at 16 either. Or shouldn't have had to. And so, you know, what's going on here in this chapter has been a series of really good moments. Like, Greer and Joff talk. And it's kind of interesting here, too, because they kind of played off whether or not there was going to be a romance between the two of them. Obviously, we don't get one. But I think it's done well. I mean, the door is open. If they were to show up in another novel, that could be there. But it was just enough to kind of put that spice in there for people who want that sort of thing in their book, but not to the point where it took away from Leia's story, because ultimately everything in here was supposed to be about Leia in some way. But we had their moment. We had her talking to Castropho. We had her talking to Cor. This so far was seeming very much like the end of any book ever. Like everything had kind of come into play. And then Cardassian shows up and assassinates Gar. So now there has been actual death, at least in the Senate bombing, no one had died. Somebody from the Senate has been killed, and absolutely everything erupts into chaos. She does say something to Leia. She says, at least, you know, consider yourself lucky I was thinking strategically. Which in that moment doesn't necessarily make sense. It's a gut punch, and then to go from that gut punch to just understanding you only have a chapter left, you're like, what is going to happen? How is this book going to resolve? I mean, obviously I knew it was coming, but like, because I'd read the book before, but, you know, it's very out of left field. So we get to Chapter 31. Chapter 31, Leia tries to convince people to investigate Gar's death. But here we find out what the strategy of killing him instead of killing Leia for revenge. And where that comes in. And the strategy being that Cardassian was shown, or Harassian, I keep confusing her name with Cassian. Harassian shoots Gar, but that closes up all the loose ends. Because then that connects her to the napkin bombing, that connects her to all of these other things that have happened in the book, and then you get this answer. You get the answer of who was funding Bryn Riven, and everything gets tied up, and now no one wants to investigate anything anymore. Leia is frustrated. So it's kind of like the ultimate revenge is this really cements Leia having no power and being frustrated by the lack of power, and how completely useless now the New Republic has come to be, because what we'll find out here in a few pages is even the appointment of a first senator has been put on hold completely because the process is so chaotic. It is now where the book will take its last super intense final turn, where Leia is dejectedly walking the halls of the Senate. She finds a television, she's watching the television, and they haven't pinned it all on Hedrassin, they pin it on Ransom Casterfoe. And he has been arrested for treason as if he had hired her to begin with. And this is a lot. Leia rushes to Greer. Greer has been going over the security footage that she has from when Casterfoe was meeting with the Amaxines on Daxam 4 when he went to get the helmet. And all of the footage has been doctored. It's been taken, it's been hacked, it's been doctored to make it look like Casterfoe was more friendly with that group than he was. And he was already treading a line trying to look friendly. So they have no proof of his innocence because it's all been doctored. And it's this point where Greer loses any hope on the Senate. She sees it as a point of corruption. And it's here, and eventually Leia will see this too. We're seeing the systematic revelation that the New Republic at this point is a lost cause. It's just a question of how long is it going to stay around. Leia rushes off and manages to see Casterfoe before he gets taken back to Ryosa. And this is one of the most gut-wrenching passages in a Star Wars novel I have read. So here they reconnect. He's handcuffed. He's disheveled. The guards are there. They don't have full privacy. And they have to talk. And in this moment, they can kind of let go of all the hurt that passed between them as they realize that Casterfoe has been set up, most likely by other centrists. You know, the pain that happened doesn't matter. And they can be, you know, he says that she's the first friendly face he'd seen all day. And these dire straits kind of let all that fall away and let them be friends again, but just for these last few moments before they're really gone from each other completely. There's a lot of tragedy with what happens with Casterfoe as well. I mentioned several videos ago that this book, when it talks about politics, largely talks about, are things done on a galactic scale or are things done on a planet-by-planet scale, right? So you have the idea of the populace that just think there should be kind of an overarching government, maybe, but all the planets should do their own thing. You have the centrists who want to have that stronger, centralized government. And very rarely will the book wade into actual political topics and whether or not those political topics are right or wrong. But the one that gets specifically brought up is Casterfoe mentions that he recently helped to get the death penalty reinstated on Ryosa. And I made sure to point that out as we were going through the book. And the reason why that's relevant is he is now being taken home and charged for treason on his homeworld, where there is now capital punishment. So in this point, we realize that not only is he going to be imprisoned, but likely executed for his crimes. He's also up a creek without a paddle because he shot the only ally he truly had in the foot with Leia by revealing her identity, though if he hadn't, he probably wouldn't have been in this situation unless maybe he refused to do so, and then he would have. The tragedy is Casterfoe is largely in this situation because of his own doing, either his own political choices or his own emotionally motivated choices. Even though they're not his fault, he was manipulated every step of the way, so his story is one of great and intense tragedy. Leia struggles with the idea that she would still have to carry the burden for leading the galaxy, that she had this young person who was going to help, and now he can't, as well as the fact that she's losing a very good friend and one of her few friends, especially having just lost Gar at the previous day, I think. So she's losing so many of her friends all in a go, either because they don't talk to her anymore, they've been assassinated, or they've been framed for that assassination. And she's tired, and she realizes now the centrists are eating their own, that Casterfoe has been set up. The centrists, maybe not all of them are bad, but they're going to eat anyone who isn't. They're going to get rid of anybody who isn't. and that war at this point is inevitable, and this is where she really switches. I don't think she loses faith in democracy. I think she still believes in democracy, but she loses faith in the foundation of the New Republic and understands that it cannot sustain the democracy she would like to see. We go to Lady Carisi, and she is reveling in everything that is happening. All is proceeding as she is foreseen, as it were. Leia meets up with her, and this is a great power move on Leia's part. Leia just tells her, you know, she figures out that the recording could only have come from Barin, the planet that Carisi had become governor of, and as such got the royal families, you know, proved to the royal families that Carisi had broken the royal seal, and got her title removed. Not just the one that she was coronated for in this book, but in general. She is now no longer royalty. And what's really intense about that is if it were anybody else, like Leia wouldn't really... I think at some level, if she lost the title of princess, it would probably hurt her, but it wouldn't mean near as much to her as it would to Carisi, who has literally no other way of validation. Leia calls her out on that and points out how sad that is. But the irony is this is something that really shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it's debilitating to Carisi. And so Leia is really able to just put some salt in a wound. It's a trivial revenge because she still lost Castrofo, she still lost Gar. She doesn't know to the extent that Carisi is evil, though she must have some understanding. This is Leia's chance to like really get in one good kick before the end of the book. It's at this point we reach the end of the book, and the end of the book is the start of the Resistance. So this novel had shown us the start of the First Order, where the First Order was coming from, especially in conjunction with the Aftermath books that we had already read. That the First Order was born of these separatist senators who are going to presumably break away from the New Republic, join up with the army that's waiting for them in a couple of different nebulas, and then the First Order is going to happen, and that's where we get The Force Awakens. This is where we see the startings of the Resistance, that it is a separate entity from the New Republic. It is not truly affiliated with the New Republic, but basically where the New Republic is infested with First Order people anyway, and also largely unable to do anything. I mean, if they couldn't work together to get an investigation done, they're certainly not going to work together to take military action against an eventual First Order. So this is where Leia starts the Resistance. This is the beginning. You know, we're about to go in the Rise of Skywalker to see her rebuild the Resistance yet again, this poor woman. But then also to presumably see the end of the Resistance if the First Order is defeated, as I suspect it will be. But to also now see this is the beginning. This is the first club meeting. Of course, we have Joff and Greer there. We have Snap Wexley, who we've seen in a couple of things, as well as the woman with him. I looked on Wikipedia, and it looks like she appears in the Poe Dameron comic, but not extensively. But there's a couple other characters. Amat is somebody we've seen in the sequel trilogy, so he's somebody you would recognize. Akbar, of course, you would recognize. Harder Colonia is actually the doctor from The Force Awakens, so if you recognize her talking to Chewie, she's like, oh, you must be very brave. Nine Nub, obviously, is somebody we've seen in the movies before as well. That's the book. That's Bloodline. I guess there's not a whole lot I can really say about the overall themes of it that I haven't belabored in the other videos as we've gotten to this point, but there's so many things I appreciate in this novel. I really appreciate that it showed how you can have differences in ideology. You could have somebody like Castrofo who had questionable admirations for things, but could have integrity in of himself, but then also show you how you can have a member of a group, of a ideology, that individual might not be bad, but that ideology could still have a rottenness to it, or at least individuals within could have a rottenness, and that you could have an ideology that seems ostensibly better, but that there could also be a stagnation or a rottenness within. The character of Gar is so valued and looked up to and presented as a good character, and yet he would kind of self-sabotage the government. And so I think the way that they tell the story, too, that the idea is, do you like the big overarching centralized government, or do you like the more planet-by-planet way of doing it is better in a fictional setting, because then it's not about, you know, are you following this line of progression with politics or that line of progression? It takes it away from being specific topics to the big argument of just how do you govern. I have a couple of videos on this channel about is Star Wars too political, and to summarize them, even though I would encourage you to check them out, to summarize them, I would say that Star Wars is highly, highly political, but it's not always topical, and that's the difference, right? Like, you watch Star Wars and there's going to be politics. This book is filled with politics, but it's not a current events thing. You don't read this book going, ah, yes. And you might find connections to current events, certainly, but it wasn't written with the intent of, here's a current event that was done in 2016, so in 2019, you better remember what was a current event 3 years ago, or you're going to be up a creek without a paddle when you read this book. By making it political, but this broader, more general understanding of it, it keeps it timeless. So you can read this book at any point in time. It's going to connect to what a country, a nation, a planet, or whatever is going through, because it's going to be these broader themes. It's a political archetype versus making everything about a specific topic. You had Aftermath, the Aftermath books where Mon Mothma wanted to reduce the military by 90%. That's a specific topic. Yes, this book had discussion of the death penalty because it became relevant to Castrofo's eventual fate in this novel. I don't know, it works for me because it's these broad strokes. I liked the way this was framed, that it was just an argument about how do you govern at all versus an argument on, and I don't mean like bickering argument, but like a discussion on a specific subsection within politics. So I don't know, I think it was done really well. I thought it was done very tastefully. I thought it was able to clearly convey good and evil. I mean, the centrists do end up being the villain in this book, but they are ultimately the villain because they want to kill and take over the galaxy, not necessarily because they want this centralized government, and you see that because Castrofo isn't terrible, and you see the people who want democracy, but maybe they want democracy for the wrong reasons because they want freedom from this potentially authoritarian government, but they also want freedom to be able to ignore every other planet and not help everyone else's needs. And so this book really articulates so well why politics is complicated. And when I say that, it's a big trend nowadays to not like phrases like all sides or both sides, or don't be in the middle on things because there's one side's good and one side's bad. This book kind of in some ways got away from that, in some ways didn't, but you can have evil people who exist and want to do terrible things. That doesn't mean they necessarily count as a side. Like, you can have the centrist argument versus the populist argument of government, but then also have people that just want to see the galaxy burn. And of course they would happen to pick the one that would give them the most power. And that can be a separate discussion. And that's something I really appreciated about this book. But it didn't do it at the expense of making the bad guys not bad, or making the bad guys more sympathetic. Like, there are evil people in this book who are clearly evil, who follow a clear ideology for a specific reason, that are specifically the villains by the end of the book. But you are not completely unsympathetic to that ideology in general, just that it's being manipulated. And now I'm just talking in circles, but I don't know. I really like the book. One little thing I'm going to say at the end. I'm thought about doing this earlier, but I didn't want to for a specific reason. So somebody had actually mentioned it in a comment a couple of weeks ago, but Claudia Gray fan casts her books. So she usually somewhere on her Tumblr or somewhere will post like who she envisions when she writes, which is a really cool thing. Not a lot of authors do that. And I thought about showing you guys that, but I didn't want to for a specific reason, because there would not be a fan casting for the character of Corey. And some of you, when you read this, may have put 2 and 2 together, and that's super cool. But I didn't want to show you why there's no fan casting of Corey. There's no fan casting of Corey because Corey is in the sequel trilogy. Corey is seen in The Force Awakens. She was originally supposed to be in a much longer plot line that was for Leia, that was cut for times because for the pacing of The Force Awakens, they wanted the first time you see Leia to be at Maz's castle, which necessarily meant it had to be after Hosnian Prime. This entire plot line took place before Hosnian Prime, so it was cut. But the point where Corey shows up in The Force Awakens is right here. Corey unfortunately dies on Hosnian Prime in the Hosnian Cataclysm. That is the opening salvo of the war in the sequel trilogy. That's an extra big gut punch. That was actually something I hadn't connected when I read the book, and I was just looking up characters after I'd finished reading it and realized it, and it's sad. It's really, really sad, because Leia, when she and Corey are talking it out, says, you know, I'll remember her, I might have need of her services in the future, and she does, and it is Leia that sends Kor back to Hosnian Prime, and she is the reason why Kor is there, and Kor dies, just to add a little bit of insult to injury on the tragedy that is this book. The other thing that Bloodline does really well is it balances tragedy and hope. And even though this book came out before The Last Jedi, it was not a part of the Journey to the Last Jedi novels. It came out like in the year in between, or the years in between the two movies, but it kind of preemptively understands what so much of the tone of The Last Jedi was going to be, which is tragedy, which is kind of creating your own worst enemy, failure to stop something, failure to notice it soon enough, and finding hope at the end. You know, the end of The Last Jedi is sad. The Resistance has just been wiped out. Luke Skywalker is dead, but it's also hopeful. And this book ends the same way, that it's hopeful even though there's so much tragedy around these characters. On that note, one last little theory I want to talk to you guys about. So, the napkin bombing. We have word that Hadrassin did it, and that they linked things back to her, but there's always been a little bit of lingering doubt, mostly because of that note. Now, on the surface, if you just take the book for what it is, Hadrassin did it. She did it not at the behest of her senator patron. Presumably one of the people in their group left the note so that no one would die, and that's just how this story goes. There's been a fun little fan theory, and I didn't want to talk about this until we knew for a fact that the note never got brought up again. But if you watch The Last Jedi, you can see in the scenes, the flashback scenes in Kylo's hut, that Kylo has a calligraphy set, or young Ben has a calligraphy set. It's actually shown in the Last Jedi visual dictionary. You can see Kylo's calligraphy set. It's said in this book that it's unusual to still be able to handwrite things, that very few people do handwriting. And so you have a note that is written by hand, and you have her son, who has mysteriously never been in this book. At no point do Luke and Ben show up. Some people have theorized that it's possible that Ben, at this point, had already left Luke, left the Burning Temple, joined up with Snoke, and is in some way involved in this book, and could have some way been involved in this bombing, and left the note for his mother. Which I love as a theory. I don't know that it tracks. The book does tie up everything pretty nicely. Snoke is not directly involved. The First Order is not fully formed yet. I don't know. The biggest thing is just that you never talk to Luke or Ben in the book, even though you do Han. Now, Gray was probably expressly told, don't talk about Luke, don't talk about Ben, or don't show them, because they probably didn't want to show their hand in where The Last Jedi was going. And it's probably just that simple. For me, I would put, did Ben write the note, in under like tinfoil hat conspiracy level. Not something that I think is super likely or super will be revealed, just because I don't know how well the timeline really matches up with that. But we're really close to Charles Soule's Kylo Ren comic, and maybe we'll learn more about that, and maybe it'll get addressed. But it's just a fun little theory to hold on to. But that's our journey into Star Wars Bloodline by Claudia Gray. The book club is going on break. We will be back end of January. I might hold out to the beginning of February. We'll see. Definitely keep an eye on any kind of channel update video here if we do one. Keep an eye on Twitter. Keep an eye on our Discord. Join our Discord there. I haven't decided what we're doing yet, even though I have a lot of good suggestions. A lot of people are leaning towards Catalyst. A lot of people would like Dark Disciple. I kind of think Most Wanted would be cool, just because Ray Carson is writing the Rise of Skywalker novelization, and so to read her book would be cool. So those are kind of my top 3 right now. Master and Apprentice, or doing a read/listen to do Jedi Lost would also be cool. It's really hard to make a short list. I'm going to decide after we see the Rise of Skywalker, because it's very possible that we'll see the Rise of Skywalker and I'll go, oh my gosh, now that we've seen that movie, we need to read that book and go from there. So I'm holding off on the decision. I'm still open to any kind of suggestions and any argument for or against any particular book, but we're going to decide, or I'll decide, based off of if something happens with Rise of Skywalker. But I think that's all the housekeeping for now. Thank you guys for being with me on this over a year journey. I think it's close to a 1.5 journey for 4 books, and really spending time in this time period and getting to know these characters. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the people who've been watching this all the way through and the people who have found us because of the series. I was never sure if this would be the type of thing people would be interested in, so that means a lot to me. I could just go on, but I guess I will. Obviously, we're still going to be making stuff on the channel, but for the book club, I will see you guys in the new year. If you're not already, like I said, follow us on the socials, join our Discord. It's the best way to kind of give your opinion on what we should do next and hear any updates or just ask questions. And I'll see you guys next year.